Hello everyone and welcome to the 9th and final talk of Paris Plus by Basel, which is titled The Walt Disney Studio, 100 Years of Wonders and Nightmares. And today we're absolutely thrilled to have this roster of panelists, including, by my left, the director and artist Andrew Norman Wilson, the professor at the School of Critical Studies at the California Institute of the Arts in Los Angeles, Norman Klein, and the artist Meriem Bennani. The conversation will be moderated by Sabrina Tarasov, curator, writer and critic based in Paris. La conversation sera en anglais. Vous avez un QR code à l'entrée pour avoir une traduction live. Merci beaucoup.
All right, okay. Well, thank you everybody for coming. I'm not going to dwell too much on introducing everybody here. I'll let their kind of work speak for themselves. But what I wanted to say is that we've kind of been touring Paris for the past couple days, thinking about ways in which we could host this panel. Obviously, it's somehow inspired by the 100-year anniversary of the Disney Studios, though what that could encompass is so vast and impossible to cover every aspect of it. And so what we've been really talking about is thinking about a kind of conversational structure which will go from animation histories that are embedded within the Disney Studios to how the animation bleeds into a kind of a themed space, a scripted space, and then into other concerns that are related to architecture and sort of entertainment spaces and so on. And each of the sort of my tune pals will be covering a kind of different line in this. And what I would say connects us all is that there's an interest in looking into what I think Disney's biographer Neil Gabler wrote as the sort of desire, the Disney philosophy to push into the limits of unreality here. And so he's really we're looking into something that has to do with the theme park's ability, especially to carry a kind of a philosophy of playing at the impossible, let's say, and what that looks like when it comes from animated space, from ideas of the line that push into this, and how these have kind of bled into an experience of being in public and urban space. And this is, when I say we have a kind of mutual interest that starts in the line, this comes from an understanding of the sort of animated line as a mode of thinking, the line of thought. It looks at the line as a kind of wayfinding device, a direction, a kind of geography of the entertainment space. It has to do with the animated contour. The line is a kind of form of nomenclature, a kind of language that's capable of sort of translating, converting between different types of, let's say, thought to lived experience, from animation to urban space, etc. This is also something that will encompass a kind of, let's say, ethos or way of thinking about the world as it is transforming, the world going outside of itself. The idea of the contour inverting, shaping, metamorphosing comes into, I think, each of the works. There's also a sort of expansion that happens in this, where the animated line, which is what Norman Klein will start us off with, ultimately kind of transforms around characters. The characters become space, the space becomes experiential, and the experience becomes a form of life, or a proposition for a form of life, which is sort of influential to ways of existing in the world now, as it sort of comes from an idea of an image of elasticity, let's put it this way. Something that I've been thinking about also that might set the tone for what we're talking about is something Sergei Eisenstein wrote in his notes on Disney about the studios, the early animations in the studios providing a momentary, imaginary, comical liberation from the time lock mechanism of American life. The idea in the early kind of 30s, or in the late 30s, sorry, when Eisenstein was writing about this, is that Disney, the animations provided a break, a kind of way of, a very complicated break, mind you, in the aftermath, but a break for the psyche nonetheless, a way for us to think about life and about the environments we're creating in cartoon space a little bit differently. Like said, though, there are many other ideas that are encompassed, obviously, within the Disney Studios. I think Norman will start us off. We'll move into Miriam's work, and then finally the other Norman. And we'll try and get a sense of what this means, what the history is, what Disney has given us in terms of prescriptions for folkloric, mythological, kind of pre-logical ways of thinking, what that thinking does as language, and how those languages convert through different propositions for space, whether they be virtual, animated, urban, or cinematic. The last thing I'll say here is I think we have a sort of mutual thread that can be chased in the sense of what has to be understood is that animation is something, as Norman was saying before the talk, that was sculptural and architectural before it was cinematic. And though in some ways the thread that connects us all is an interest in how cinematic space becomes the sort of time lock mechanism, the urban planning structure for theme parks, it's also this idea again of how what builds up to that? What is animation before cinema? How does it become cinematic? How does the cinema become a mode of space? And how does that mode of space become a lived experience as we that we encounter throughout our day-to-day lives? The expert on the subject who will get us started is Norman Klein. So all yours.
Not much time to say this. So we could narrow it quickly. In the 1950s, animation once again drifted from its movie grammar into architecture. Oh, hello? I won't repeat. I'll assume that I screamed. I'm from Brooklyn originally, so we scream all the time. We're born screaming, you know. So it drifted into architecture and urban planning. So it's curious to try to understand. It's hard to summarize that animation began essentially as an architectural and theatrical form of entertainment in the late Middle Ages and found its way into the line, right? But in the Baroque period, there actually was animation in churches and in castles and across the culture. I can't possibly say this fast enough, so you'll just have to take it on faith and begin to journey yourself and go through Italian buildings and say, holy shit, this thing is moving and I'm standing still, or something like that, right? About accelerated perspective and so forth. These are some certain examples. This process was sometimes even called neo-Baroque. It has a lot to do with the term artifice in the 17th century, which I write about, so I won't try to summarize it. It's not that complicated, but time is moving, right? We have all these people to have you meet, right? I called it also the electronic Baroque in the 80s, I remember. And we have to understand how peculiar it is, because associating this narrative about chaos with Disney, one of the least chaotic ideological forms of world culture, is strange. You know, the park was based on the principle of reassurance. They use it all the time, and yet the principle was still there. It's curious. Again, something I can't summarize. You'll have to take on faith or dive in and discover it. But these two artists have, you say. So it's odd that Disneyland was suddenly at the center of this. Sometimes it's called a neo-Baroque transition. The shockwave behind it was mostly economic, powerfully linked to how high consumerism began to replace manufacturing and industrialism as the heart of the American economy. So now it's 70% of the economy. Again, how do I summarize? I can't say it fast enough. See, you have to trust me. It's terrible. Why should I trust him? I don't even know him, right? Anyway, but this shift and the illusionistic tricks and the counterpoint were part of a very, very complex grammar where anti-logic became logical, right? Sometimes, recently I called it 2.5D, where no matter how realistic it looks, it mustn't look uncanny, as they call it. That's too dangerous. It has to look like you know it's false. So it tells you it's false in a real way, and the real falsity of it becomes a dynamic about chaos, and yet somehow you can still make money from it in a very big way. So it's a very, the contradictions are enormous and fascinating and endless, and artists find it increasingly interesting because, as I would point out later, it seems to have entered the way we understand money, and seems to have entered how derivative and bonds were set up. It seems to have something to do with how sovereign debt was set up. It seems to have something to do with how money becomes almost like an animated form of reality. So this is something big, and yet so innocent, so childlike. It's dangerous, no doubt about it, but interesting. You have to take it on trust. It's dangerous. Yeah. Let's see, what else I say? Disneyland was suddenly the center, and so on. I can't fly across the centuries, I say. It has to do with storytelling linked to carnivals and late Middle Ages, commedia dell'arte, tricks with perspective, and so on. And it finds its way into more linear forms and into forms of light and tricks from the 17th century forward. And finally, it's formally industrialized, I guess, in the late 19th century. And now it's come back in a very strange way. It's fascinating and also bizarre, because we have all this digital technology that can make anything, right? So if I became an AI of myself, I would be an animated version of myself. And if I were running for president, that'd even be worse, right? This kind of thing. President of any country, I suppose. Much of it finds its way into silent cinema, of course, and there you do have the cult of the line. And then in 1923, a brilliant but rather gauche company was set up from Kansas City and brought to Los Angeles, and was very, very, very humble for a long time. The pictures of how humble it was are bizarre, right? And then it didn't seem that it could catch up with the other studios that were selling animation, which was very popular in the 20s. So Sullivan Studio was the most famous. They had something called Felix the Cat. 750 million people saw Felix. Oswald the Rabbit and Mickey Mouse were modeled on Felix. And Felix was modeled on Chaplin, and so on, right? But luckily for Disney, Sullivan was a serious drunk, and he didn't believe that talkies were going to work. So by 1930, with Mickey Mouse, of course, Disney had begun, but they were still broke. Why were they broke? Because the amount of money that was allowed for cartoons dropped by 90% with the Great Depression. Someone walks into their office one time and says, would you let us take Mickey's face and sell it for children's tablets? And then they said, what do you want from us? They said, just sign this paper. I said, wow, this is like a nickel under the refrigerator. By 1934, most of their money is through tie-ins. So already animation, while it's growing, right, is becoming some strange connection with a promotion and a new form of capitalism and entertainment. That's even before the parks, you see. In the 50s, Walt decides to go into suburban phantasmagoria head on. He'd been thinking about it. I can't summarize all the thinking he went through. A lot of it's very neurotic with his children and going through little rides with them and so on. They opened up the theme park partly through money from ABC TV. They opened up a TV show to go with it. And they choose a suburban town in Anaheim. They even have to pay for the freeway exit into Anaheim in order to get it built, and so on. So then we ask, what happens next? How does this form of film, right, become a theme park so easily, right? I have one anecdote for you. I met a man, Mark Davis, who originated essentially the design for Pirates of the Caribbean. And I found that the most amazing ride. Of course, I saw it on acid at first, so I think it sort of enhanced its meaning to me. Its intimacy was even more powerful, but it is probably the greatest of the theme park rides ever designed, arguably. So I was very excited to meet him. He's one of the 9 old men, and he was this important character. He'd done all those great films. And so I asked him, well, Mr. Davis, when you had to draw for an animated film, that's one thing, but when you were drawing it for a theme park, right? How is it different. And he just looked at me and said, what do you mean? So I looked at the pictures, and they looked exactly the same as for an animated film. So then I asked him, well, when the Imagineers, very clever name for engineers, were invited to build these animatronic women trying to flirt with men, right? Now it's about food. It was originally about sex, right? And so how did they change it? And he looked at me again. What do you mean? And it was identical. So he went, it's identical. Can you imagine? They used the same form to build a park and a ride that smelled like the Caribbean, where you became an animated character without any transition at all. That's one crazy kind of narrative form. What do you think? It's pretty astonishing. What do you mean? You know, the kind of thing. And I have the subtleties that they had in developing this narrative of chaos. I'll give you one anecdote, because anecdotes are fun. Here we are chatting. It should be more chat, don't you think? Not just a formal lecture. It's sort of about cartoon worlds in a way, right? Destroying us. You know? We're the Chase in the Chase cartoon. I was working with Chuck Jones, who at that time was 90 years old, was close to it, and he was limping along. He had a new hip. And then he saw a squirrel, and he realized that the squirrel was a perfect cartoon, because the whole key was he knew how to take chaos and make a reaction shot out of it. He leaned over, and the squirrel was looking at him, holding something in that way that squirrels do. And he said, I don't want to embarrass you, with these people around, but I think I should tell you, you should know, you're from the rat family. And the squirrel looked at him, and suddenly the squirrel did look surprised to hear it. I realized how the genius that came out of this, the nuance of knowing how to take the chaos and give it that kind of inverted energy, and yet you knew that. Oh, it's magnificent. So there's so many examples like that. One of my first students, I'll mention this. Keep track of the time. Am I okay?
You have 5 minutes.
Why don't I just relax? One of my first students was John Lasseter. Pixar. Toy Story and all of that, and I was watching him because they hated him at Disney. When he was working as a student, they were sure that this was all bullshit, that digital computer work would destroy the playfulness, the energy of animation. I was watching him, and we would occasionally talk about things, but I had zero influence. You know how I know? Because he's very rich. Anyone who listens to me probably will never be rich. That's my theory. But we were talking about narrative strategies and how to see if we could use the inadequacies of the computer to make story. So he started with his Luxo business with the lamp that was bouncing around like a cartoon character. And it was very clear when he started with Toy Story, even I could see, he understood that computer animation made ugly-looking people. And so the only way to solve the ugliness and make it work in an animated way was to make it the point of view of toys who didn't know how ugly it was. That's really smart. What do you think? Wow, really smart. I mean, you can act superior to it and say, well, is it high culture or low culture? No, it's really smart. So when you deal with these people and understand what that means, and now we're trying to recover some way to apply this complicated sculptural, architectural, and cinematic language that's also used in many other forms and helps explain, by the way, TV editing as well. It's no surprise that we have these very, very smart and in their own ironic way, dedicated to this process. So I think I'm just about done?
Closing words, please.
This is my closing words. So I'll invite them to explain how they're entering this process. And it does appear that it's finding a new cycle of meaning, but we should understand that it's both reassuring and perverse. and it's about perversity becoming reassuring, and at the same time, it has to be a critique. You understand? I mean, when I wrote about Coraline, the last thing, also I was turned into a cartoon myself, by the way. It's very weird, but I'm the face of Paranorman because of Norman, and there was a student of mine who made my face that character. So I become a chaos character of a different kind, but in watching this virtual reality, they discovered that virtual reality had to be animated. It had to have a chaos factor. You had to know that's what when they made Coraline and other films like it, you had to know that it was fake. Knowing it was fake makes it more real because it has the embrace of the maker. If the hand of the artist isn't there, it's so complicated and so simple. You have to have respect for it, but also understand when it becomes a form of capitalism, it's dangerous, you know. And I can speak as an American, now that it's a form of politics, it's super dangerous, right? This kind of thing, because AI is also part of it. But I think we're just at the end.
I think that's a good place to pause maybe and move over to Meriem. And I think that one thing that I want to just offer up here as a transitional kind of bridge or something is this anecdote from Mark Davis about building Pirates of the Caribbean through feats of storyboarding. The conversion between flat space to three-dimensional space is something that will lead us into Meriem's work, but also in the sense of paranormal is a great way of Paranorman, sorry, is a great way of putting us into your work as well in terms of thinking about the conversions between live action and animated space, between sort of real people into characters, but also what Norman has talked about as sort of motivated characters versus functional characters, which is really at the core of your work.
Yeah, and hi, I'm Meriem, and also like you ending on knowing that it's fake makes it more real. It was kind of perfect because that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about. How I've been using cartoon to make documentary. And actually, please interrupt me at any point because for me it's like really, really cool to get to hear you talk about these things. And I feel like if anything makes sense at some point for you, please interrupt me. Actually, because I kind of based this whole thing of the distinction you made between, in the 7-minute cartoons, the characters that are driven by function, and then the first live action and Snow White and Disney kind of bringing motivation into characters. Can you talk?
They wanted to bring melodrama in because he's a schmaltzy kind of guy, Walt. Also an anti-Semite and anti-union guy, but that's different sides to everyone's personality. But also people loved him. That's what we want to understand. He only was called Walt, by the way. Yeah. No one ever said Disney, and the tears would roll down. So he must have been lovable in some way. But he wanted to bring something that could compete with regular 90-minute cinema into his form because it wasn't making enough money. And so with the Three Little Pigs first, and then with Snow White, he decided. But the blend was always strange because without the nuisance and the sense of chaos, animation doesn't quite work. Yep. So he always had to find some way. So that's why the evil characters are so much more interesting than this kind of malted milk personalities of with the lead characters usually. So,
and you talked.
It was always a problem trying to figure out how much chaos, and they always had to put it back.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. And for me, it was really helpful to read that distinction you made. And also, just earlier, we were having a coffee, and you talked about the genie, and I'll bring that up later, if you don't mind, just because. No, because you said something amazing, but I have a moment that I would like to ask you to say what you told me, but like in like 3 slides, because. But based on something I'm going to show, because when you talked to me about that, I was like, okay, I'm going to ask you about the genie, but.
They asked. They asked.
I mean, in 3 slides, if you don't mind, just so that it rings with the.
In 3 slides.
But, if you want, I can reorganize.
I'll be a slide.
Yeah, in 3, in a second. Well, basically, so you talk about that, and so I'm an artist. I make films that actually play with genre. So I think of them as documentaries. I often go and I guess film people, and then and I film all my films in Morocco, where I'm from. I work a lot with family and people I love, kind of, and then in the process, I studied animation. I'm a nerd. I'm a cartoon fan, and in the process, I have found that cartoons are kind of like what helps me build the stories inside documentary. And you're talking about what's real and not real.
Yes.
And so based on that, I guess I wanted to show you a little bit in very practical terms, like how I use cartoon in this animation process. I will say that, I think we often think of documentary as like supposed to be raw and real. Anyone who works in film or any type of media knows that they're absolutely manufactured and that they're kind of like, in a way, like there's more sincerity in things that are telling you that they're being made, which cartoon is very much that in the way you said it. So like we often think about kind of like real life people or people in documentary setting as being the ultimate people with motivation and just like a narrative arc that is either the one inside the movie or the one of their lives. And we often think about cartoon as an opposite of that. And I have found that, kind of like bringing this cartoon, like this is an example here, and I'll tell you more about it, but kind of like having a cartoon space to pause from the documentary and having these cartoon characters to narrate the documentary and help me kind of like put things together is like they always remind you that I'm here making it. And in a way, I'm trying to connect differently than with like traditional documentary methodology. I'm going to show you in the next slide. So I made this film called Mission Teens. I'm from Morocco and I went to French school, and I've always wanted to talk about the weird kind of like post-colonial residue of, or like I guess little factory of little colonized French thinking people that I am a product of that French school creates. And I never know how to talk about that because the way I think was built by speaking in French. So I needed a new syntax to even think about it from a third point of view. After living in America for a long time, I think I had a third point of view that is also has its problems, but I found that I'm ready to go to my high school and do a reality TV show with the students. I did think that I should be part of it because it's too easy to kind of like not put yourself in it, and because I'm filming everything, I chose a stand-in, which is this donkey that you see here, and then an animated space without a backdrop, which is something that you also both have talked to me about, kind of like in the 7-minute cartoons, there's like kind of like a no place. You were talking about this idea in a documentary that is so much about context and backdrop, but creating this space that is like a cartoon space gave me the opportunity to talk about the process of making the film. So this is a little clip I'm gonna play. I hope the sound works. I don't know if we can turn off the light a little bit. No, okay.
So do you feel guilty?
About what?
I don't know, I feel like I'm supposed to ask these type of questions.
Well, now I do. I mean, I always do when I film people, or when I do anything. I wonder if I should have filmed the 13-year-old boy.
Which one?
Taha, the one who started his interview by saying,
Je suis Amralita, élève au lycée Descartes. J'aime les chips. Je suis un élève plutôt normal. Je vois pas ce qui est spécial en moi. Ce que je pense, c'est que j'aime bien jouer aux jeux vidéo.
But you wanted it to be about the popular kids.
yeah, true.
So how did you find them?
At the school, like all the others.
How did you feel going back there?
Late. I felt late.
So I'll stop here because we don't have that much time. And so, I was thinking about this idea, right? Like the different spaces that can coexist and kind of like teach you something about each other. And then similarly, sometimes, I guess the two worlds are, they're porous, the animation world and then the documentary world. And so sometimes some things like elasticity and plasmaticness, to quote you were talking about Eisenstein, but like the things that like work in the mechanics of like gag-driven, like short-form cartoon, sometimes those things start affecting my live-action characters. And so what that allows me to do is kind of like in filming a scene with real people and not interrupting anything that is happening in the editing process, bringing this kind of like very known cartoon way of moving things. They allow me after the fact to point at something I'm interested in that usually you might miss. So I'll show another example. I'll stop here because it can go on for a long time, this scene. So yeah, I kind of started, my first job was to do special effects and like motion graphics for different companies. And I was an animator and I was drawing and I was, I started learning the special effects and also doing animation. And at some point I thought, what if I use these special effects to kind of like bridge the worlds between both? And I've found that for me, like they've become like, and I use that word a lot, the word tenderness. Again, like, I film people in situations that I build a connection with them. And I feel like that the cartoon treatment of family members has become a way of like, I only do it with people that I can, after that, in fact, show it to them, talk to them. And it kind of has become a kind of like banter, like on like also sometimes, the way I've seen, characters that I grew up around and as a kid and kind of going back to that. But yeah, but something I've been thinking a lot about, okay, I'll pause it, actually. Ooh, how do I go back? Something I've been thinking a lot about is, I film a lot of times, I guess, bodies that, there's different themes depending on the films I'm working on, but the subjects are often kind of like political, through story, through someone's personal experience, not through like this bien-pensant kind of like collective idea of like what politics should look like. And something I think a lot about is that the characters in, the cartoon characters in my films, they don't really have a body, in a way. But the people that I film, they do have a body, and their body is very much tied to a social-political context. The cartoon narrators in my film, I have a crocodile, I have a donkey, I have so many different ones. They can't really die. They don't really experience violence, or when they experience violence, it's an image of violence, but it's not really violence that scares you, and puts your life in danger. I guess they have the possibility of abstraction in their existence, which the characters, the people I film, they don't have that luxury of abstraction. And so I have thought about the fact that something interesting can come out of that. Maybe they, through these narrators, I can maybe kind of like put together, a world that, is kind of like thinking about the violence while you also see maybe violence happening, and trying to understand bridges between those things is something I'm interested in. One of the projects I've worked on for, that kind of like my bigger project is a trilogy called Life on the Caps. And I'll say it quickly, but it's a sci-fi speculative documentary. I imagine in a future where people can teleport, that people who teleport without visas, so illegally, would be arrested by this new version of ICE, the American Border Police, that intercepts the teleportation. And there's this island in the middle of the Atlantic called the Caps that becomes a holding area for people intercepted. And I imagine life on this island, and I make a speculative documentary inside the Moroccan neighborhood of this island. There are 3 chapters, and I'm basically filming Morocco and using a proxy of science fiction to talk about things through this proxy. And I'm about to show you a video from the Caps, which is these boys that call themselves the Croco Gang. The symbol of the caps is a crocodile. The narrator is a crocodile animated. And the Croco Gang is these boys in Agadir asked them to make this film, which is within the film, and they made it themselves to ask for the liberation of the Caps Island. And so you're gonna see the end of their video, and then you're gonna see a cartoon interruption. Maybe that'll make sense about what I was talking about. If we can turn off the lights, it would be, if it's, we'll just dim them. There's a little lag of sound because it's on PowerPoint, but it's in real life it's well synchronized. Yeah, so you know, and actually, I don't know how much time we have, but I'd be curious to hear your takes because I feel like a lot of my takes are very intuitive in the making things. But I was thinking, you know, we talked about Roger Rabbit, which is not Disney, but it's for me it was a visual shock as a child. It was when you had a VHS, you have 3 and you watched many. So I was lucky one of the ones I had was Roger Rabbit. Also Mary Poppins, to bring it back to Disney. But this coexistence between live action and cartoons, I think as a child, it just made me feel like, you know, it just bridges, like, it's kind of like going to the theme park and you say being casted as a cartoon. So you feel like this, basically like my mind was blown, obviously. And, you know, I was talking about these cartoon characters that they don't experience death. Also, of course, we all think about, you know, like I was, I think 8 when Mufasa died in The Lion King. But, you know, in Roger Rabbit, there's like, I think it's cool because like the cartoons, they can die because they can be dipped. And I think maybe because it's a feature film, they need characters who are scared of dying so that they can have interesting stories. Like the way Roger Rabbit loves Jessica Rabbit is not just hard eyes. He's actually worried about her. It's real love. So these cartoons, they're different than the cartoons that I use in the documentaries, I guess. They like, I bet you have something interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
In broad terms, this animated way of thinking, we'll say something like that, allows you to take fact and fiction and play with them because all facts are fictive and all fiction are facts. Mm-hmm. I'm often asked to just lie. Sometimes people ask me to lie, and I lie, you know, and it works. You know, it takes them a while to get the lie, right? Yeah. And I've done some pieces about that. And so it allows you to talk about the line between what video sees and what actually is there. Mm-hmm. It's strange that animation has that ability to do that. It's a very powerful instrument to show the ontology, right, mm-hmm. of lying and fact and ideology. In a strange way, it has a political edge to it that you've discovered and is useful. Mm-hmm. I agree. And animators are usually not asked to do that, but if you see, occasionally you'll see how it's done. And if you look at how powerful you can make TV commercials, convince you, and how dangerous it can be, it's extraordinary. It's a tool, don't you think? Yeah. So it is about the act of lying, right? And the act of fact and fiction. And your films your videos about that in a way.
Yes. That's what I mean, and I forgot to tell you, but 2 slides ago it was the genie moment, but now I heard that I have 2 minutes, so I'll be really quick. You said, okay, I'm going to quote you, but you said, it's like a very simple quote, but it really spoke to me. You said, cartoons are not story trifles, they're folklore about the rituals of daily life. And so that is my transition to the next thing I want to talk about. You know, cartoons are American, but when you're a kid and you see them on Cartoon Network, you don't know that they belong to another country. So for me, they were never American, till I understood also there's a full economy behind them and stuff. But I think for me, I don't want to be on a superficial representation level, whatever. I'm speaking sincerely. I feel like they help instantly canonize or historicize. And they can also flatten. But as a Moroccan, North African, African, Arab, I feel like it's been incredible to use cartoons as a tool to like instantly historicize people who I think are people that, you know, I'm interested in. So I'll quickly do it. But there's this, routine is a hashtag. It started in Morocco, and it's like all diasporas of like North Africa. There are YouTube videos. I switched on my PowerPoint, but not that one. Okay, so there are YouTube videos where women film themselves. You can't tell if they're erotic or they're about teaching you how to cook or like clean the house. And they go viral. This is the most famous one, Fatiha. And when I was watching them, I was thinking about The Sorcerer's Apprentice in Fantasia, because they have all these objects in the kitchen, and it's like this fantastic moment. And I imagine kind of like, but they get so much criticism on YouTube, and I was imagining the objects in their kitchen kind of turning against them. And I feel like the reason I got so interested in this hashtag is because the kind of codes of reality TV, like these women are their own executive producers and talent, and they're kind of like a Moroccan-made reality TV. Like it has a syntax from Morocco. It's not borrowed from other countries. And to me, they're actually showing us it's a blueprint for how we could make film, or there's a blueprint for media production that is local and not based on imports. And I find it very revolutionary. And what I felt when I first watched Routini videos is probably similar to what I felt when I watched Fantasia. So I made this kind of animation exercise, and I'll end there, based on Fatiha. But here she's a flower, and she's in her kitchen, and the kitchen is turning against her.
Thank you. I should also say that after we'll have Andrew Norman Wilson talk, but we'll have a little bit of time for some questions and so on, so maybe we can continue to chit-chat about stuff. One way of overlaying here is I think when we're getting into the work. You were mentioning also this porous space and the space of the non-space or the absent background that you've kind of reached in these later animation exercises. And I think this idea of, I was reading, recently about a theorist write about the experience of going to Disneyland and why people would make the decision to go nowhere instead of somewhere, instead of traveling to a destination, why they would choose the theme park as a non-existent space, something that's represented maybe by the no place, but also like the elsewhere as a kind of concept. And I think when we get there, when we understand the theme park also as a no place, as a kind of as a place where maybe the real rubs up against the imaginary or its own imagined kind of lore, mythic history or something, we start to approach what we're dealing with in Norm's work. That's my spiel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm going to read a letter. And it definitely comes out of reading Norman's work and enjoying Meriem's work and being Sabrina's roommate for 2 years. So hopefully the connections will be self-evident. In 2018, I wrote a letter to the CEO of Buffalo Wild Wings because I had another show in Europe, but really just wanted to do a show for my friends in Los Angeles. Specifically a 6-channel video installation on the patio of Buffalo Wild Wings near my house. And Sally, the CEO, wrote back and said my videos, quote, aren't the right fit for a sports bar. My next show in Europe was at the Kunstverein Braunschweig, which is situated in a neoclassical villa that, legend has it, is haunted by the daughter of its former owner, a woman named Helena Hallant, who was born there in 1816. And apparently she had a preference for the Baroque and would alter the interior design to make it more Baroque than neoclassical once her father had passed. So to make peace with Helena's ghost, I decided to make a ghost/cloud/heaven themed exhibition that disrupted the order of the neoclassical architecture, building a tangled maze of corridors and rooms within rooms composed of cotton and gypsum. So 4 video works, one of which you see here, starring spectral 3D animated characters, were incorporated into the scripted theme environment. And while I was living there in Braunschweig at the villa, setting up the show, I wrote back to Sally, the CEO of Buffalo Wild Wings, and CC'd Helena, the ghost, on the letter. So I'm starting from the middle of the letter, at which point I'm addressing Helena. Helena, legend has it that your trips to Sanssouci and Potsdam and Charlottenburg and Berlin left you with a preference for the Rococo over neoclassical nods like the villa we're in right now. I know how it is, even for artists like you and I, Helena. We grow up imagining a certain kind of world for ourselves and then realize that there are rules to the game. Historical weight has a way of consigning us to what we call fate, and I wonder if the factors that determine our course here on Earth, family lineage, tradition, and the era into which one is born, carry into the afterlife. Out here in meat space, the classical keeps coming back with a highly rationalized vengeance, whether it be the Italian Renaissance, the Age of Enlightenment, or Nazi Germany. As I'm sure you observe, these cyclical returns tend to smooth out and regulate, to correct and restore the monuments of Greece. Sometimes it's subconscious. The Pantheon was built around 125 AD, which inspired Brunelleschi's 42-meter dome over the Santa Maria del Fiore, completed in 1436. Then the printing press was invented, and over the next few centuries, domes appeared in Aricia in England and on the University of Virginia campus, to name just a few. Via La Rotonda was finished in 1592, which inspired the Via Salvhosps in Braunschweig that you're floating in right now. Following these lines forward through history, the buildings start to look more and more like theme environments. And we see an image that's not captioned, it's my work. I'm realizing each neoclassicism selects some models among the range of possible classics that are available to its particular draft of modernity and ignores others. For your father, a merchant, the caduceus was chosen, and 2 of these staffs of Hermes adorn the exterior as bas-reliefs. As god of the high road and the marketplace, Hermes was above all else the patron of commerce and special protector of the traveling salesman, but he was also the god of roads, thieves, travelers, and sports. Sally, this might even extend to his provenance to the sports bar. He mastered rhetorical persuasion and special pleading, and the myths are full of instances where Hermes outwits the other gods for the sake of humankind. He He knew the boundaries of society well and would transgress their borders in order to confuse their definitions. Medieval allegory constructed a systemic ballast for meaning, yet at the same time opened the gates for the proliferation of possible meanings for any given emblem, to the point at which it risked that bad infinity, which for millennia defined and perhaps still defines the abyss for Western thought. As long as allegory could be restricted, as in Dante, to an airtight hierarchy, maddening riddles could be repressed. But by the 17th century, that hierarchy had ceased to be manageable, and the harmony and proportion governing the strata of meaning began to fall apart. The Baroque rushed towards the brink of a void where any sign could signify anything. I get the sense you know this, Helena, and I imagine weekends when your man was out of town, in which your own personal heaven touched down to earth, and these hierarchies collapsed. Suspended paintings from the ceiling fixtures to watch them spin and disturb the symmetry of the villa. Ornamentation poking out from blank space, refusing to respect the limits of the classical frame that contained the illusion. Composing forts in the bedrooms with your most arousing fabrics. Bringing an ostrich in from the garden and hotboxing the Fraulein Zimmer. Reaching for exotic image banks stuffed with pierrots, rhinos, and apogees that extended beyond the catalog that European art had relied upon for the best part of 3 millennia, an enveloping suspension of disbelief. Before leaving Los Angeles for Braunschweig, I visited Universal Studios Hollywood to ride Harry Potter's The Forbidden Journey. I would use the industry term ghost train, which would apply for Universal's recently closed Jurassic Park The Ride, but it's actually an advanced dark ride with vehicles mounted on robotic arms. Both proscenium and track are absent. Suddenly, I was thrust into the rising action as a central character. Immersion seemed likely as long as I accepted my new role as narrative participant. This kind of environmental design doesn't reproduce the story of the literary works insomuch as it evokes their atmosphere. Indeed, it seemed that every texture, every sound, every turn in the road reinforced the Harry Potter universe. But the Forbidden Journey expands on this principle by using projection screen technology alongside the physical props, augmenting the physical sensation of movement through the theme space with the representation of magic on screens. A holographic Hagrid asked me if I had seen a dragon. A video image of my face was projected onto a cloud of fog, blasting me with cold air, as a Dementor tried to suck my soul out of my body. The cliffs outside the Chamber of Secrets, perspectively corrected across a videodome that wrapped around my ventral portion, nearly caved in on me. As with many theme park rides, the story is a bit muddled. Amid all the chaos, it's hard to follow the narrative. But for a few glorious moments, the Flu Network, flying benches, and whomping willows seem not just possible, but actual. The presence of the supernatural at this point in our current day is a puzzle, as it appears to have been for the first Baroque. Take Pozzi's ceiling at San Ignazio in Rome, or Pietro da Cortona quadratura ceiling for the Palazzo Barberini. On both ceilings, the distorted projection of anamorphosis presents the appearance of a viewpoint that doesn't exist, a column of atmosphere extending to infinity, a trompe l'oeil dome on a flat surface. The epiphany of divine truth was produced through cutting-edge techniques of painterly deception, as well as with realist techniques in filmmaking. Faith and the lack thereof are indistinguishable when both are grounded in illusion. The flaunting of abundance, the layering of allegory upon allegory, the withdrawal of the actual, these conditions return in the epoch of Harry Potter's The Forbidden Journey, with its mixture of real sets, animatronics, and dome projection screens. In the Baroque, the supernatural wasn't a matter of life after death, but of an imminent realm just beyond the earthly facade of the mundane. It was habitable, it graced the quotidian at every turn. This technically mediated beyond both exists and does not exist, whether it be an allegory of redemption via immense trompe l'oeil ceilings, or basking in the glow of immersive screen spectacles. And so, Sally, we find ourselves again in a lively sports bar chain dishing up wings and other American pub grub amid lots of large-screen TVs. I counted 36 TVs on my last visit, including the 6 outside on the patio, empowering us to manifest, quote, legendary experiences between friends. The interior design incorporates locker room-style waiting benches, furniture made from recycled basketball courts, and faux concrete booth dividers numbered like bleachers. The idea being that you're at the stadium, whether you're watching the game from the bleachers or waiting to be put into play. In your response to my last letter, you wrote that my videos aren't the right fit for a sports bar. Sadly, this was not a surprise. Do you all ever throw the term brand gremlin around at meetings? I was reading a white paper recently that defined brand gremlins as people, processes, and other entities that are out of alignment with the organization's overall brand strategy. The term gremlin emerged out of Royal Air Force slang to describe a mischievous creature that causes malfunctions in aircraft, automobiles, and other machinery. While the brand sabotage is symbolic rather than technological, both create friction in what is meant to be smooth colonial expansion. I get the sense, Sally, that you think my videos would behave like brand gremlins if installed at B-dubs, antagonists from some perceived outside, hell-bent on eroding your bottom line. Would there be a way to script this scenario so that the resolution offers the same kind of aesthetic pleasure that the arc of gremlins invading Kingston Falls over 106 minutes? Or would there be a way to think of the videos on the patio in relation to the Fox Sports Racing broadcast inside? There's a formal bridge, my videos are infinite loops, and Fox Sports Racing runs 24 hours a day. Further along, would this bridge then be a bridge for an artistic community? Because to be honest, whenever my friends and I hold our water aerobics and B-dubs nights, we prefer to bring our glistening wings back to my friend's grandmother's pool, where Sabrina and I lived, instead of dining in. We feel a bit out of joint with the environment, and not in a generative way. The good news is that we've consumed your hackables, the Chipotle BBQ dry seasoned wings smothered in creamy queso, the teriyaki sauce tenders topped with Cajun spices, and we can taste subtle hints towards what we like to call, in the art world, heterogeneity. Xfinity is expansive. There are over 100 24-hour sports networks alone. But what I'm offering you is the infinite. A 15-minute drive from the Pasadena B-dubs and holding a Yelp rating that's 1 whole star higher is Uncle Yu's Indian theme restaurant. It has everything it needs to be one of many authentic Taiwanese restaurants in the San Gabriel Valley, namely Taiwanese ownership, staff, and food. You see an illustrated portrait of a suspendered Uncle Yu on the sign, and then usually Uncle Yu himself sitting in those same suspenders near the register when you walk in. But then you start to notice the Indian theme: dream catchers, wooden tribal chiefs, and servers, all Taiwanese, wearing beaded headbands and synthetic feathers. In another imaginative leap, the seating seems to have been lifted from German beer hall design, and, in lieu of indigenous programming, the television play Fox Sports Racing. 2. Okay, we're going to cut this short somehow. 1 minute. Okay, we're going to cut it really short. Compare this to Jurassic Restaurant, which also held a 3.5-star Yelp rating until it closed in 2017 after a tree fell through the roof. Faux cave walls made of shaped foam and a life-size model of a Tyrannosaurus Rex skeleton quickly coded the space as an unlicensed Jurassic Park-themed restaurant. But then the details started to chip away at the program. On display were plastic Burger King kids' meal Rugrats toys, paper Chinese lanterns, and miniature foam pumpkins. The Taiwanese food was served by Taiwanese waitresses who wore full Native American costumes and accessorized with Uggs, chokers that spelled out their names, and utility belts emblazoned with adhesive pink triangles. The televisions played Fox Sports Racing. So I'm going to skip Alpine Village, skip that. Maybe I'll just read the last slide and a half. Yeah, okay. Other times I feel grateful that I'm able to walk into the same rooms you visited at Schloss Sanssouci, Helena, where the gilded woodwork and paintings and mirrors and textiles make me feel as though I've walked into a humble heaven before it gets sucked into a dimensionless vacuum. Objects that retain memory rather than models that orient the future. Sally, I'm sure you're aware that already Every Formula One engine has a 3D modeled doppelganger of itself outside the car to predict when the engine will melt. And the time will soon come when a Formula One driver won't be able to compete with a self-driven car. Already there's technology that exists in our consumer automobiles, like anti-lock brakes, that are restricted in Formula One because audiences are invested in the mechanical talent of the drivers and their potential for error. If it was only about the predictive modeling of the engine and the outcome, that 21-week season would be determined in nanoseconds. Here's my last sentence. Oh, I don't have the last slide there. Right, I understand why. For now, it seems the best I can do is to allow us and our ideas to live in the minds of later generations. I'm thinking of oryx and angels, the secret of durable pigments, prophetic sonnets, the refuge of art. Is this the only immortality we share? Yours in good faith, Norm. And if you want to read the rest that I cut off, it was published in the Baffler a few months ago, so it's online.
Thank you. Okay, without further ado, I think we have a salacious a couple questions. Sorry, I think we can sneak in a couple questions if there are any. Yeah. Or if you guys want to keep, asking each other. Yes.
Yeah.
The suspense is killing me. How did it go with that letter?
With the letter, she didn't write back to the second one. And so I haven't yet exhibited at the patio at the Pasadena Buffalo Wild Wings.
Okay.
But
You never finished that was the, final. I wanted to hear how it ended.
yeah, to be continued. Yeah.
We're standing by.
Great. Well, as they say, that's all, folks. Yeah.
Thank you.